Right. So we've got, we're going to be talking about human factors and cybersecurity today. I'm just going to do a very brief introduction, mostly to kind of lay the groundwork for how this all comes together. So I am an STSM and Senior Manager at IBM by day, and I joke by night, I'm an adjunct professor as well. I have a DSc in cybersecurity and a PhD in human factors. And the interesting bit there is coming around from the IT ops space and cybersecurity into the human factors space. So human factors is really the combination of engineering, design, and psychology. And so taking all of those practices and bringing that into the cybersecurity and IT operations space is really a kind of where I came into this space. And there's a lot of really great research and capabilities in the human factors space that can really be leveraged in the cybersecurity space as well. And I also recently authored a book called Effective Vulnerability Management. Spoiler alert, there is a human factors chapter in that book. I couldn't help myself. Okay, all right. So what I want to break down first is the psychology aspect of the human factors. So human factors as a discipline has been around for many, many, many years. I believe since the 1930s, it was officially designated as human factors and ergonomics. The best example I can give of a human factors, kind of an older example of what human factors means and why it's so important, is how we build hammers. There are different hammers for different uses. Some are for, putting a nail in a wall. Some are made of rubber and used for different scenarios. They're shaped differently, so you can hold them differently. They're also meant for different purposes, being that one hammer would not necessarily be effective in all situations. So we need lots of different tools to help us do things in different ways. And so taking that ideology, that method, that mechanism into cybersecurity and understanding how psychology plays a role into what we do every day as security practitioners can help us really become more effective, build better processes, and really ultimately build better tools that will help give us the right data and really be more effective. Okay. So cognition, this is a really top level, term in psychology, but it's really the way that we think, the way that we understand the world. And when we're bringing that concept into cybersecurity, one of the biggest things I think about a lot is how do we create tools for security practitioners that make sense for them? We have so much data that we consume every day. How many vulnerabilities? I think last year the number was 55 vulnerabilities released every day. How do we get a good idea and a good understanding of the data that's available for us today? How do we prioritize and remediate vulnerabilities? And then how do we use that data that we have to help us understand our environment even better so that in the event that we can't remediate a vulnerability, talking about legacy software and equipment, we have the ability to put in mitigating controls. But to understand what needs to go where, we need to really understand our data. So are we getting the best do we have the best tool in place to help us understand that data, or are we seeing items only as itemized lists? That can be really difficult, especially when you're looking at vulnerabilities at scale. Burnout. This is one of those things it's very well documented, especially in the academic community for SOC analysts. They see all of these alerts and data constantly. And number one, our brain can only take in so much information, right? We can take in so much information and act on it. It's kind of like if you're reading a book and you start to read too much and you kind of start to lose what you were saying, you're like, oh, I have to go back 3 or 4 pages and really understand what I was just reading. It's that phenomenon, but there are more serious consequences when it comes to security alerts. If a security alert is missed, if we're acting on the wrong things, if we're looking at the data incorrectly and we're not actually seeing the big picture or the things that are most important, it could lead us to miss really critical things. So using tools and thinking about how we show data, how we visualize data to our analysts and engineers can help make sure that they're seeing the right things and that we help reduce burnout. One of the other things that I always recommend when it comes to understanding burnout and how teams can combat that is when if you're in a role where you're constantly looking at tickets or alerts or notifications in the same repetitive nature over and over again, is to provide special projects, special opportunities for people to work outside of that space. If they're a SOC analyst, but they're interested in development, get them involved in a development project. Let them do that for 20% of their time or something like that, so that they can continue to do their daily job and meet what they need to do daily, but they can also do stretch projects or give themselves an opportunity to learn a new skill, knowing that there is going to be inevitable turnover in a SOC. I don't know that I've met too many people that have been a SOC analyst for 20 years or something like that. So there's going to be some turnover, but helping that person prepare for their next role and actually using that to your advantage can be really beneficial. All right. I wanted to dig in a little bit more into the human element in vulnerability management. We've heard, and I'm listening to some of the other talks, which were really great, but talking about, the amount of data that we have, the amount of vulnerabilities that we see. Vulnerability management is quite complex these days, given, we have a number of multi-cloud environments. We have data migrations that are happening, people that are probably still migrating from on-prem to cloud environments, people who are doing cloud native deployments, people who are using low code or no code solutions. That vulnerability management picture changes depending on what the environment is. So it can be quite difficult to, kind of pick a one size fits all solution, especially when each environment is going to be unique. We also have a very complex way of scoring vulnerabilities in the way that we have the CVSS scoring system that gives us our base scoring metrics. And I will say I'm a big fan of at least having somewhere to start, right? CVSS is a place to start. And when you're thinking about vulnerability management in building in a mature practice, then you start to look at things like EPSS, the Exploit Predictability Scoring System, using the CISA-KEV catalog, the Known Exploited Vulnerability catalog, leveraging lots of different other tools to help you build that prioritization picture. But because of the sheer amount of data and volume of vulnerabilities that we're seeing, it's difficult to say that, without understanding how humans are part of that process, it can be difficult to find really great solutions. So it's important to understand the complex nature of vulnerability management so we can start to choose tools, solutions, environments that make the most sense for us and help us really understand our vulnerability landscape. Human factors security engineering, and I wanted to provide a couple of names and papers that I highly recommend if you're interested in learning more about human factors and security engineering or human factors and cybersecurity practices. There's a paper I reference, I think, in literally every talk I give, but it's so good. It's called Security Fatigue by Dr. Calvin Nobles. He is one of the biggest researchers, I would say, in this area. He's written a number of papers around security fatigue and alert fatigue and vulnerability management fatigue and all of those things that we sort of experience in the security world, but that have a psychological context or where we could leverage human factors, understanding, and knowledge to bring into the cybersecurity community to help us sort of deal with some of those challenges. Human factors as a discipline is widely used in the for pilots in the airline industry. This is something that's really well known and well used, especially because it's such an important industry. But leveraging and understanding things like cognitive overload, context switching, how we're constantly switching from one application or one messaging system to another, or maybe we have 5 messaging systems we have to constantly keep up with. And so understanding how context switching could potentially impact how we see data or maybe miss alerts or notifications can actually help us understand how we help our users, help our security practitioners use the tools that they have to make sure that they're optimizing what they're using, but also so that we're not adding to that cognitive overload, that mental workload that we experience every day when we're taking in so much information. And then I wrote a paper on vulnerability cognition, but how much understanding we actually need to have of vulnerabilities to be really effective in vulnerability management. And that differs depending on maybe what your job set is or what you're responsible for. But that way we can actually alleviate some of that pressure of having to have this really in-depth understanding of CVE IDs and CVSS scoring and metrics and all of that, so that we can really help people be more effective at what they do. One of the biggest ways I see to do that is roles and responsibilities. That's a really nice way to help sort of alleviate that. Quickly, to sort of wrap up, there are plenty of things to kind of get started with. And I mentioned a couple of references and resources to get you started. I also highly recommend Dr. Margaret Cunningham. She was a cognitive psychologist, and now she's in the cybersecurity space. She's written a number of really great papers on eye tracking and how individuals in a SOC actually look at their screens and digest information. It's really fascinating. Um, Cybersecurity education is part of each field. I include this not just security awareness training, but for people to understand cybersecurity's impact on their daily lives. More people are getting more and more familiar with this, especially as they deal with their own, data breaches at home and dealing with it in security and awareness training, but helping them understand not just security and awareness, but who their cybersecurity teams are and what they do. That can be really helpful for them. How psychology plays a part into cybersecurity programs. There are a number of ways to do this. You could hire a human factors consultant for an hour to come in and sit with the C-suite, or have them come in and sit with the security team for an hour and have them see if they find, maybe they find some problem areas or some gaps where maybe they could help address some of them, either with tooling or maybe with process improvement, something like that. But they could help kind of do that. Something Dr. Margaret Cunningham mentioned in one of the talks we did earlier this year that I really I think is a great idea. There are a number of people who are interested in human factors or who have a psychology background, who may be sort of silent human factors, people who are educated in it and understand it really well. They may be a really great ally or be great to work with your cybersecurity teams that can help sort of bring in some of those ideas and that discipline into what we do without having to go out and hire maybe someone outside of the organization, depending on budget and things like that. Understanding perception and cognitive limitations and how those affect teams might actually help, to determine where you want to start with your security tooling, or, maybe you need to kind of do a security tooling investigation and an inventory, right? See what you've got, see what's working. Maybe it's additional configuration. Maybe it's tuning or tailoring. It could be a number of things, but to kind of do an asset inventory for your security team as well. And then just thinking about human factors and how it can play into your security tooling. There's a number of potentials for opportunities there to improve things over time. So I highly recommend checking out some additional research. And of course, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.